Thank you very much, Bahram, and thank you to the other fantastic, wonderful guests and for their contributions, which are hugely important. I think what's been made very clear from the statement that was read at the beginning of this event, as well as the countless speeches we've heard, is that clearly the Islamic Republic of Iran must be boycotted and must be politically isolated. And there are so many reasons for this. Of course, one is for its crimes against humanity. This is not a general sweeping statement, but there is huge amounts of evidence of this, including in a people's court called Iran Tribunal, which found the Islamic Republic of Iran guilty for crimes against humanity during the 80s. And there are other examples of it as well. If we look at the government's response to COVID, there is a huge pandemic that has killed millions of people. The regime has banned US and UK vaccines in that country. That itself is a huge crime in this pandemic for something like that to happen. So that's just one more of the many crimes that it's committed. And of course, we've heard about the execution and the assassination of political opponents. But clearly, what we're talking about is a theocracy. It is a theocracy in the 21st century. That in and of itself is a reason for why this regime must be boycotted. People talk about Margaret Atwood's The Handmaid's Tale and about this crazy republic, the Gilead Republic. But the Islamic Republic of Iran is Gilead in reality, in a real form, and it has affected adversely the lives of people in Iran and the region for more than 4 decades. Now, there has been talk about the boycotting of a system of racial apartheid in South Africa, and how clearly we can see that there is a need to boycott a system of sex apartheid in Iran. Ideologically, practically, you can see how these relate. It is as abhorrent to segregate people based on sex as it is to segregate them based on race. And I think what I'd like to do in the few minutes that I have is talk about practical lessons from the anti-apartheid movement and how we can translate that in the struggle for a boycott against the Islamic Republic of Iran. I think one of the things is that it's very clear to all of us here at this conference and your audience is that no government will willingly place economic, political, diplomatic sanctions against a country unless there is huge amounts of public pressure. And I think that is one of the lessons of the anti-apartheid movement, that it took mass mobilization, years of mass mobilization, in order to force Western governments to impose a boycott on the South African government, the racial apartheid of South Africa. And I think one of the things that we can see that it's a result of mass mobilization, that ethics, that human rights will take precedence over economic and political relations. Practically speaking, if you look at the success of the anti-apartheid movement, AAM, we see that it very much worked locally. So every local branch targeted their specific government in order to expose their relations with the South African racial apartheid regime and also to mobilize local pressure. And I think that's something that we need to do a lot more of. For example, with regards Britain, it was targeting British companies, demanding divestment in South Africa from specifically British companies, shaming them, exposing them, and organizing protests in front of these companies. We saw very specific targeted protests in the area of sports. And now in Iran, too, we've got ban Islamic Republic of Iran from sports because of its execution of Navid Afghari. So we do see a lot of links. And of course, political prisoners was another important target. What we know very clearly is that governments will not do this willingly. They haven't done it willingly. They continue business as usual while Iran executes and terrorizes its population, but also people in the region. And the way to create that mass mobilization historically, as was carried out by the anti-apartheid movement, was creating links and mobilizing with trade unions, with labor federations, women's groups, student groups, as well as political parties, to help raise awareness and help bring about pressure against governments locally. And I think that's something we need to learn look at very closely on how to organize locally to make sure that a boycott does take place. I do want to just add that there are things that are more difficult for us because obviously South Africa was a US and a British government ally. The Iranian regime is not. We live in an era of identity politics, which has diminished the strength and role of international solidarity work. And these are things that are working against us. We also see in the world that we live in today that a criticism not just of Islam, but of the hijab, of the Islamic movement, of the Islamic regime of Iran, is often seen to be one and the same as bigotry. So these are things that we continue to face in our battle for a boycott of the Islamic Republic. What we have in our favor is that the Iranian regime is a common enemy of people in that region, but also that we are able, as a result of social media, to see this huge, modern, secular, universalist movement that is taking place in Iran and in the region. And that gives hope and courage to people across the world. And it helps to both humanize the struggle of people in Iran as well as establish networks and links. So I guess from my perspective, I think we can't rely on Western governments to do the work of human rights. We have to rely on the public in the countries that we live in. It is that public that will stand with us. It is that public that will put pressure on Western governments. And it is that public that will help bring about a boycott of the Islamic Republic of Iran. I think one of the things that's very clear is that the protest movement in Iran shows clearly that another Iran is possible, and that movement needs to be supported by the public. Thank you.